The Cook County Courthouse was not a place of comfort. It was a cathedral of judgment. Its cavernous halls, lined with cold, polished marble and dark mahogany panels, seemed to absorb sound, leaving behind a solemn silence that echoed with generations of power. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and floor wax, a sterile smell that did nothing to warm the oppressive atmosphere. High above, vaulted ceilings dwarfed everyone who walked beneath them, a constant architectural reminder of the weight of the law. The room was a sea of dark suits and stern faces, a homogeneous assembly of middle-aged men who carried their authority in the set of their jaws and the confidence of their stride. Outside, the vibrant, diverse pulse of Chicago beat against the building's stone walls, but inside, time and progress seemed to have been held at bay, locked within a closed, formidable circle. Seated on a hard wooden bench, Malik Washington was a stark anomaly in this world of established power. At 17, his lanky frame was draped in a simple dress shirt that was just a little too big in the shoulders and a pair of neatly pressed slacks. He looked like a high school student who had wandered into the wrong room. On the floor beside him sat a worn backpack, a canvas and nylon relic from a different universe, contrasting sharply with the gleaming leather briefcases that populated the aisle. But a closer look would reveal the truth of him, not in his adolescent features, but in his eyes. They were deep and intensely focused, holding a quiet fire and a maturity forged in hardship. Beside him, Eleanor Vance sat with her calloused hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her face was a roadmap of a difficult life, yet her gaze, fixed on Malik, held the last embers of a lifetime's hope. The bailiff's voice, a monotone drone, sliced through the quiet tension, decalling the case of the people versus the defendants in the matter of Eleanor Vance. Malik took a steadying breath and rose to his feet. A wave of soft murmurs rippled through the courtroom, followed by a few poorly stifled snickers. The opposing counsel, a seasoned lawyer with a cruel smirk, didn't even try to hide his disdain. From the elevated bench, the judge, a man with a mane of white hair and a deeply skeptical expression, peered down over his spectacles. "Where," he asked, his voice laced with impatience, "is the plaintiff's counsel?" The words hung in the air, a public and deliberate humiliation. Malik stood motionless, absorbing the blow, while Eleanor seemed to shrink, the weight of their contempt pressing down on her frail shoulders. The sting of that collective scorn is a familiar wound to so many who have been judged unfairly. It's a silence that screams, a moment where a soul can either break or forge itself into steel. If you believe in the power of stories that show the strength of the human spirit, your subscription helps us continue to share them. Instead of answering the judge's question with words, Malik responded with movement. He walked with firm, unhurried steps toward the bench, his worn sneakers making soft sounds on the marble floor. The murmuring ceased, replaced by a confused and curious silence. Every eye in the room followed him as he stopped before the judge, unzipped his backpack, and pulled out a simple, unmarked folder. He opened it and, with a steady hand, placed 2 documents onto the polished mahogany. The first was his Illinois State Bar card, the plastic new and gleaming under the courtroom lights. The second was his law degree from the University of Chicago, the words "Summa Cum Laude" printed in elegant, undeniable script. The judge, his expression shifting from irritation to disbelief, slowly reached out and picked up the papers. In that instant, the atmosphere in the room fractured. Contempt gave way to stunned silence, and the boy who had been dismissed just moments before now commanded their complete and undivided attention. The judge, a man accustomed to the predictable theater of his courtroom, stared at the documents as if they were artifacts from another world. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered the earlier whispers and snickers. Mr. Davenport, the opposing counsel, had lost his condescending smirk. In its place was the cold, sharp look of a predator re-evaluating its prey. Malik walked back to the bench, his steps measured and deliberate. He sat beside Eleanor and gently placed his hand over hers. Her hands were trembling, but as his fingers closed around them, a sense of calm seemed to flow into her. He didn't look at the judge or the jury. His focus was entirely on her, a silent promise that they were in this together. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had been entirely redefined, moving from the elevated bench to the humble wooden one where they sat. This resolve was forged long ago, in a small, dimly lit apartment on the south side of Chicago. He remembered being 10 years old, a skinny kid, drowning in a sea of library books at a wobbly kitchen table. The power had been shut off again, a common occurrence that punctuated his childhood. Just as the shadows grew too deep to read, Eleanor Vance would appear in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the light from the hall. She would light a single candle and place it carefully beside his book, its small flame pushing back the darkness. "You keep on reading, baby," she'd say, her voice a soft, steady comfort. "That light you got in your head is a whole lot brighter than any of these." That memory was the foundation of his entire being, the quiet promise he had made to the woman who always made sure he had enough light to see. Eleanor's own life had been lived in the shadows. For over 3 decades, she was an invisible resident of a grand mansion in Lincoln Park, her existence confined to a small, windowless room at the back of the property. She was not an employee with rights or a contract. She was a ghost who cooked, cleaned, and cared for a family that barely acknowledged her presence. The pittance they gave her was framed as generosity, a gift that kept a roof over her head. They had methodically isolated her from the world, convincing her she was too simple, too uneducated to survive on her own. Her spirit was slowly, systematically eroded by 1,000 daily acts of dismissal. Her identity whittled down until she was little more than an extension of the house itself, silent and unassuming. Their bond was cemented during his teenage years. On the rare Sundays she was allowed to leave the mansion. He would meet her at the bus stop, always carrying a book for her. One afternoon, sitting on a park bench, he read her a poem by Langston Hughes. He watched as tears streamed down her weathered cheeks, not from sadness, but from the profound relief of being seen, of having her own deep, unspoken feelings given voice by another. It was that day, with the sun warming their faces, that he made his promise aloud. "I'm going to get you out of there, Miss Vance," he had said, his voice cracking with adolescent conviction. "I'm going to make them see you. I swear I will." Her quiet nod was not one of doubt, but of a desperate, burgeoning hope. In the courtroom, that promise was being tested by fire. The defense attorney, a man named Davenport, was a master of cruel insinuation. He painted Eleanor as a manipulative and confused old woman, twisting her decades of loyalty into a sign of mental instability. He relentlessly attacked Malik's credibility, using his age and background as weapons. He made snide, just audible comments about community projects and charity cases, seeking to frame Malik as a naive idealist at best, and a cynical opportunist at worst. The local media, hungry for a sensational story, latched onto this narrative. The fight for justice is often a lonely one, waged against the tide of public opinion. If you believe in giving a voice to the voiceless, your subscription helps us continue to tell these essential stories. The public pressure fueled Malik's deepest insecurities. At night, alone in his Spartan apartment, the weight of it all threatened to crush him. The confident lawyer from the courtroom vanished, replaced by a terrified young man who heard the echoes of their laughter in his sleep. He was haunted by the specter of failure. Imposter syndrome was a constant, gnawing presence, whispering that he was out of his depth, that he was just a boy from the South Side, playing a game rigged against him. He would study law books until the words blurred, driven by the paralyzing fear that one missed detail, one small mistake, would not only fail Eleanor, but also validate every single person who had ever looked down on him. Under the strain of the trial, Eleanor's fragile health began to deteriorate. The years of neglect and relentless labor had taken a toll that hope alone could not mend. A chronic respiratory condition, long ignored, flared with a vengeance, leaving her weak and short of breath. Her memory, already scarred by trauma, sometimes faltered under Davenport's merciless cross-examinations. He seized on her moments of confusion, using them to methodically dismantle her credibility in front of the jury. For Malik, the trial became a desperate race against time. He wasn't just fighting for a legal victory, he was fighting to restore a woman's dignity while she was still strong enough to witness it, to feel the sun of justice on her face. The family Eleanor had served for 30 years wielded their wealth and influence like a bludgeon. They were pillars of Chicago society, and they began to close ranks. Potential witnesses, like a former gardener who had once expressed concern for Eleanor's well-being, suddenly had no recollection of events. Delivery drivers who had seen her isolation through the kitchen window were no longer reachable. Malik felt like he was fighting ghosts. The system itself felt complicit, a labyrinth of bureaucratic procedures and unspoken biases designed to exhaust and defeat outsiders like him. Every motion he filed was met with a challenge. Every request for evidence was met with a delay. He was a lone soldier laying siege to an impenetrable fortress. One evening, he found Eleanor sitting by the window of the small, clean apartment he had rented for her, her gaze lost in the city lights. He brought her a bowl of warm soup, and for a long while, they sat in a comfortable silence. They didn't speak of the trial or the courtroom. Instead, she told him a story from her own childhood in rural Mississippi, about a stranger who had shared a piece of cornbread with her when she was hungry. "It's funny," she said, her voice thin but clear. "A little bit of kindness. It can hold a person up for their whole life." In that quiet moment, the roles of lawyer and client dissolved. He was just the boy she had nurtured, and she was the woman who had taught him the true meaning of resilience. Her simple words landed like a revelation, cutting through the noise of his anxiety and self-doubt. He had been so focused on legal strategy, on outmaneuvering Davenport, that he had lost sight of the core of the case. This wasn't about torts or statutes, it was about a human life. It was about making a room full of powerful people see the soul of the woman who sat beside him. His entire approach shifted. He would no longer try to be the kind of lawyer they respected. He would be the man Eleanor trusted, the storyteller who could finally give voice to her silent 30-year ordeal. So often, the path to victory isn't found in aggression, but in a profound change of heart. We are committed to sharing these moments of transformation, and your subscription is vital for us to continue this work. His preparation changed completely. He put away the dense legal tomes and instead spent his days with Eleanor, not as a lawyer taking a deposition, but as a grandson listening to his grandmother. He asked her about the lonely nights, the small routines she created to keep despair at bay, the silent prayers she offered up in her tiny room. He learned about the single flower she had managed to grow in a cracked teacup on her windowsill, a secret act of beauty in a world of grey. He was no longer building a legal case. He was carefully, lovingly reassembling a life that had been systematically taken apart. He was gathering the pieces of her story, preparing to show the world the woman they had tried so hard to erase. It was during one of these conversations that he found it, tucked away in a worn cardboard box containing all her worldly possessions, was a small, spiral-bound notebook. It was not a diary filled with eloquent prose. Eleanor's literacy was basic, so she had communicated in the only way she knew how. The pages were filled with simple, heartbreaking drawings and single, powerful words. There was a sketch of a bird trapped in a cage, with the word "when" written beneath it. a drawing of a faceless family at a dinner table with the word "gone." And on a page stained with what could only be tears, a drawing of a single, small figure in an empty room, and the word "alone." It was the most powerful piece of evidence he could ever hope for, a perfect, irrefutable chronicle of her suffering. The final cross-examination was a spectacle of calculated cruelty. Mr. Davenport circled Eleanor like a predator, his questions a rapid-fire assault, designed not to seek truth, but to shatter a fragile spirit. He twisted her simple words, mocked her gaps in memory, and used her lack of formal education as a weapon to portray her as a confused, unreliable narrator of her own life. "Isn't it true, Miss Vance, that you are just grateful for a roof over your head, that this is all just a fantasy you've concocted?" he sneered. Under the relentless barrage, Eleanor finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her weathered cheek, followed by another, until quiet sobs shook her small frame. The case felt like it was slipping away, dissolving in a haze of manufactured doubt and public humiliation, the jury looking anywhere but at the weeping woman on the stand. Malik rose from his seat, but not with the fiery objection the court expected. He stood in a pool of silence, his calm a stark contrast to the preceding storm. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I have no more questions for Miss Vance." He then turned his gaze from the judge and looked directly at the jury, his expression one of profound earnestness. "But I would like to make my closing argument." The judge, looking at the distraught woman on the stand, simply nodded. Malik walked slowly toward the jury box, not as a lawyer preparing a legal summation, but as a storyteller about to share a sacred text. He wasn't there to argue points of law. He was there to translate the language of a silent, 30-year suffering into something they could not ignore, something they would feel in their very bones. He walked back to his table and picked up the small, spiral-bound notebook. "The defense has spent this trial trying to discredit Ms. Vance's memory," he began, his voice filling the hushed room. "They claim there is no record of her pain. They are wrong." He placed the notebook under the document projector, and the first image filled the screen. It was the simple, childlike drawing of a bird inside a cage. The word "when" scrawled beneath it. He flipped the page, a sketch of a family at a large table, their faces blank, with the word "gone" underneath. Page after page, he revealed her secret chronicle, a wilting flower, thirsty, an empty room, alone. The courtroom was utterly still. This was not a legal filing. It was a diary of a soul in captivity, its power lying in its heartbreaking simplicity. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Malik said, his voice now resonating with a quiet fire born of righteous conviction. "They laughed at me in this courtroom for my age and my skin color. They mocked this woman for her simplicity, but while they were laughing, while they were dismissing us, we were keeping a record." He gestured to the image on the screen, the drawing of a single small figure with a tear falling from its eye. "This isn't just evidence of wage theft or unlawful imprisonment. It is the soul of a woman who refused to be erased. It is the last line of defense for a person who had nothing left but a pencil and the will to say, 'I am here, I am real, and this is happening to me.'" The words hung in the air, a powerful indictment of a system that sees people but refuses to truly look at them. He then turned, his eyes finding Eleanor's. The frantic fear in her expression had been replaced by a stunned, dawning awe. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, a silent communication that passed between only the two of them. His voice softened, becoming intimate, meant for her as much as for the jury. "You taught me how to read by candlelight, Miss Vance," he said, his words a final, devastating testament to their bond. "Today, I get to read your story to the world." A collective breath was held and then released throughout the courtroom. Davenport sat frozen, his arrogance shattered. The judge slowly removed his spectacles, his face a mask of profound contemplation. In that moment, the verdict was no longer in question. Justice had arrived, not with a gavel's loud crack, but with the quiet, undeniable truth of a life finally seen. The jury's verdict was delivered not with a roar, but with a quiet, decisive finality that resonated deeper than any shout. The defendants were found liable, ordered to pay Eleanor a restitution of $2.5 million, a sum that seemed to hang in the air like an impossible dream made real. The number was a shock, a life-altering figure, but it was the validation behind it that truly mattered. As the judge struck his gavel, the sound echoed the breaking of chains that had bound Eleanor for 3 decades. Malik turned to her, and in the sterile, solemn courtroom, they embraced. It was not a hug of victory, but of release. 30 years of silent suffering, of invisible tears and unspoken prayers, finally uncoiled from her small frame, leaving her feeling almost weightless in his arms. In that moment, they were not a lawyer and his client, they were just Malik and Ms. Vance, a boy and his second mother, finding sanctuary in the quiet aftermath of a war well fought. Leaving the courthouse felt like stepping into a different world. The cold marble halls no longer seemed to mock her with their grandeur, and the imposing pillars no longer felt like the bars of a cage. Outside, the Chicago sun warmed her face, and for the first time in years, she felt its heat, not as a reminder of another day of labor, but as a promise of a new beginning. The sounds of the city, once a distant, muffled roar from her tiny room, were now a vibrant symphony of life that she was finally a part of. The money would provide security, a home, and the medical care she had long been denied. But the true prize was something far more profound. It was the restoration of her name, the public acknowledgement of her existence. She walked beside Malik, her head held high, her steps no longer timid but firm on the pavement. She was no longer a ghost, she was Eleanor Vance. The case's notoriety brought Malik a level of attention he had never sought. Instead of leveraging it for personal gain, he channeled every ounce of it into a new purpose. Within 6 months, he used a portion of the settlement, with Eleanor's fervent blessing, to establish the Eleanor Vance Justice Initiative, a non-profit legal aid foundation headquartered right in their South Side neighborhood. Its mission was simple and clear: to provide elite legal representation for domestic and low-wage workers who had been exploited and silenced. Eleanor, now in a comfortable home and with her health steadily improving, became the soul of the organization. She wasn't just its namesake, she was its heart. Sitting with new clients, her calloused hands holding theirs, her quiet strength and survivor's empathy, offering a comfort that no legal brief ever could. Their victory was not an ending, but a powerful, resonating beginning. They had not just won a lawsuit, they had built a lighthouse. The story of the boy lawyer and the woman he saved became a local legend, a testament to the idea that wisdom has no age and dignity has no price. Together, they turned a story of profound darkness into a beacon of hope for countless others still living in the shadows, proving that the most powerful legal arguments are often just human stories told with courage and heard with compassion. Her journey, once confined to the tear-stained pages of a small notebook, now inspires a movement reminding us all that no one should be left to suffer in silence. To continue giving a voice to those who have been forgotten, your support is invaluable, as it helps us to keep sharing these essential truths.